Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is Clinton and Hillary, and welcome to another episode of Black Atlantic. We are a podcast and media channel bringing East Coast voices in Canada to the world.
Our podcast is weekly with guests or topics, and you can find us anywhere online by searching Black Atlantic. This week, we are joined by the lovely Wanda Taylor. So excited to have you here today. Wanda Taylor is the author of both fiction and nonfiction books for adults and young readers. She's also a freelance journalist, filmmaker, and college instructor. Her writing has appeared in numerous publications such as Atlantic Books Today, Quill Quire, Black to Business Magazine, and Peak Magazine. Her poems and essays have also been published in anthologies across Canada, the US, and the UK.
And Wanda teaches courses in journalism, story writing for media and communications. She was a recipient of the Atlantic Journalism Association's Communications Award for Journalism, and is currently, if that doesn't sound busy enough, the mentor for the MFA Creative Nonfiction program at the University of King's College. And Wanda splits her time between Toronto and Halifax, and here's where we dive into where do you split your time the most, and where did you spend the majority of your time after being born? Hi, Wanda. Hi, Wanda, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward
we're so happy to have you.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. So you want me to answer the where were you born question?
Well, I jumped ahead. How are you?
I'm good.
Okay.
I'll say that before the show, I asked where she was right now, and she is in Halifax. So at least you're both on the East Coast together while I'm out here in Toronto.
Okay, I assumed you're in Halifax because I think you told me you were teaching a class.
Yes.
Last week, but okay. Are you well? How are you? You said you're good.
I'm great. I actually just got finished teaching a session not too long ago on representation and creating diverse characters in fiction,
which is what you're about to do. So this is a really exciting day for you. We're actually recording this on the 19th, but we'll pretend it's the 20th because your book launch is dropping today, and that's part of what you do. Wanda Taylor is on top of everything else she does as releasing her new book, The Grover School Pledge. Before we get into the book, yes, where were you born? And, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, or the dark side, as we call it, across the bridge, in a community called East Preston. And, grew up with all those traditional, the elders telling oral stories and all the traditional things that we, the foods, and everyone gathered on Sundays. And so those parts of my childhood were so memorable. And it's almost in a way kind of nostalgic and a little bit sad that we've kind of lost some of that. Elder generations and the younger generations coming together. But yeah, that's where I grew up. And then I did my first degree I did an early childhood education degree when my kids were small because I wanted to be with them every day. So I put them in daycare and I did my ECE while they were in daycare so I could actually be there with them. But once they outgrew daycare, I went on and went to get a social work degree, and I was in frontline social work, child protection for about 15 years. But I was always writing. And then I went back and did a degree in journalism because I wanted to strengthen my writing, and kind of veered off a little bit away from writing and started working in the news. So still writing, but writing content for the news. And then got promoted to producing for daytime television. So then I was writing content for that, and then started doing documentaries. And that's how so when I was working with young people, I was working with a group of young Black people young Black youth in Halifax. And I realized that they didn't really know how their ancestors got to Nova Scotia. So I challenged them to retrace the path of their ancestors and turn that into a documentary. And it was really fascinating for them in watching them learning that history. And then they started getting asked to go around to schools and talk about what they learned. And that's how I got connected with the publisher, who said, this is stuff that should be in schools, that we should be learning. And that's how I published my first book, which is the nonfiction book called Birchtown and the Black Loyalists. And that book is now part of the entire Halifax Regional School Board's curriculum for middle grade ages. And so that, like, once that book came out, that said to me, oh, okay, so maybe I can do this. Like, maybe I can write. And so now the book launch today, which is our pretend 20th, is the 8th book that I've written.
That's
Wow.
amazing.
8 books. That's incredible. And what a
Yeah.
story, and what a great feeling to know you've created something that's going to be sorry, the first one that you did, it's in all the Halifax schools right now?
Yeah.
That's
For that
incredible.
age group.
And what was the name of the documentary?
It's called Still Here, A Journey to Triumph. And so I did, because I'm an interdisciplinary artist, I infused it with, like, so there's African drumming, original music, reenactments, just using all the different, this spoken word to tell the story of that history. And then I used Gary Beals, the R&B singer, he wrote an original song for me, but then worked with the youth. So they all created that song together. And then we did a little video at the end of, a little music video at the end of it.
Wow.
Well, none of this is in your bio.
Yeah, this is so amazing.
Very interesting.
It was fun.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question just because I find it, like, I'm amused at the fact that, like, I studied to be a high school teacher, then I switched to social work.
Very similar,
Now I
yes.
do journalism,
Wow.
and I'm
Yep.
like,
Wow.
am I trying to be
we
you and I
following
didn't
each
even
other?
know you? Like, that's hilarious.
I was thinking of the parallels while you were going. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I was like, okay, but I'm curious because you just sort of said, like, that whole time you were writing. Then I know for me what inspired me to start wanting to, like, write and world build and create. And I'm just curious for you in terms of, not every person who does social work might see writing as, like, a side project, hobby, job turned, career. So what inspired you to start writing to get to a point where you've created 8 books and then, although, dabbling in interdisciplinary arts as well?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked me that, because I absolutely love telling this story because it's so important. I loved to read when I was younger, like, loved it so much so that my grade 3 teacher, Nancy Sparks, she gave me, shout out to her family because she's passed away, but when I graded from grade 3, she gave me a stack of books. So, like, while other kids were outside playing in the fields, I was inside reading these books, and I read them from cover to cover, like, multiple times. And I mean, but I didn't see anyone in those books who looked like me. So I just thought, well, Black people can't be in these stories, or they don't live those kind of lives. And it wasn't until later on when someone gave me a book and it had a Black person in it that I thought, oh, but I always wanted to tell those stories that I saw in the books. Like, the stories were great, but I wanted to tell stories where people like me were in them. And, coming full circle, the book that came out before this one, it's called It's Our Time. They hired 3 researchers to do some of the research. It was a nonfiction book. And one of those people was my grade 3 teacher, Nancy Sparks. So I got to work with her, and I got to tell her, like, you are the reason why I write, because you made me believe I could write. You told me I was a great writer, and you gave me those books, and those books took me to other worlds that made me feel like I could be a writer. So it was really coming full circle for me to be able to, like, tell her how much that meant to me, and to have Black teachers, because we hardly had Black teachers, but to have a Black teacher and they see something in you, even from grade 3, and then come back full circle and to be working with her on a book, that was just incredible. It's an incredible story for me. And she passed away like 2 months before the book came out, because it was during the pandemic and the book got pushed back. But I made them, like, go back and do a dedication to her, because I really wanted to, I just give so much thanks to her seeing something in those students. And every student in my class who had her, as adults, we talk about it and we say, like, she was our saving grace. She made us little Black kids feel like we were seen and heard. So I love telling that story. It's so important. But yeah, she was the reason why I knew I always wanted to write, and why I kept doing it on the side until I, got to the point where I could actually publish something.
That's amazing.
So that is amazing. Thank you for sharing that story. So are you saying that it was more the fact that you didn't see people that looked like you in stories like that led you to read, led you to write and explore themes of, like, systemic issues in the school setting itself?
100%, because I find, whether I'm writing fiction or nonfiction, there's always some element of what I didn't see in books, I want other people who read them to see themselves in some kind of way. But even if it's nonfiction, it's usually some kind of history that has to do with the history that we didn't learn in schools or that wasn't being told. So the history of how those 3 major migrations of Blacks came to Nova Scotia, or, just those little pieces, or how they lived back then, and all that kind of stuff. So it's a recurring theme through all of my work, is pulling out those untold stories and telling them, or finding different ways to make people see themselves represented in the stories that I tell.
Amazing.
Wow. I'm curious, just because obviously, like, since all this wasn't in the bio, do you want to run through the titles of your books so that anyone listening, because I see, like, one, Clinton and I do, we've helped build the New Brunswick Black curriculum for our schools, and we're still, like, collating works that should be added and shared in books that are important for all of the Atlantic and Canadian diaspora, and then more specifically New Brunswick. So I think that anyone listening to this, because of course we're an East Coast podcast, so not just New Brunswick specific, would benefit from hearing about any of the work that you've done outside of the main reason that you're here in the book launch.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, no, I love to do that. So Birchtown and the Black Loyalists is a nonfiction book for ages 8 to 12, and that's exploring that very first migration of Blacks that settled in Birchtown and Shelburne. The next book I did was called Ride or Die. It was actually based on a couple of different characters who were really young, but that were being groomed into the sex trade. And it's about a young 15-year-old who gets groomed, but in the end, she manages to find her way back. But it's a book to help young girls understand, like, what that feels like if you're being groomed, because sometimes they don't know. And I wrote it at a time when I was working in social work, and it was a huge issue of girls being taken from Halifax and taken around to the Golden Horseshoe, ending up in Niagara Falls, and all that kind of stuff. And so it's based on, this one character is based on a compilation of a couple of different young characters, but it's fiction. That's a YA, so that's a teen book. And then the next one was a teen book called No One's Baby, and it was about a biracial teen who was adopted by a white family. She was really close to her father, but when the father died, the relationship with her and her mother broke down. She discovered she was pregnant. She wanted to go find her biological family before her baby was born. So that's that one, and that's called No One's Baby. And goodness, what else? Oh, and then I wrote the nonfiction book, The Nova Scotia Home for Colored Children, The Hurt, the Hope, and the Healing. And that's about the atrocities that happened in the early 1920s to the 1945 with young Black kids who were orphaned or neglected or taken from their homes and put into this Black orphanage, which was supposed to be, a safe haven for young Black kids, but it ended up being basically a house of horrors. And then when those kids grew up as adults, they sued the Nova Scotia government, and they won a class action lawsuit, $34 million they won for the abuses they suffered in that home. So I went across Canada interviewing adult survivors, and then wrote that book, which was very, in a way, controversial, because a lot of people didn't want me to write that book. In a way, some people thought it was like, you're airing our dirty laundry, because some of the workers who committed the crimes were Black also. So so that was that. And then It's Our Time. That's the one that just came out, and that's looking at those historic Black communities of East Preston, North Preston, and Cherry Brook. And so looking at some really historic figures, and looking at different aspects of the culture, like religion, education, all that kind of stuff. What am I missing?
Well, right here we have, okay.
Oh, there's some of them.
The Grover School Pledge, Ride or Die. It's Our Time, No One's Baby. The Nova Scotia Home for Colored Children.
I think I'm missing two.
Birchtown and the Black Loyalists.
Yeah, and that's not mine.
That's not you, is it?
What's the song? No, I don't think that's me.
Oh.
The other
The
one
Block?
is the what does it say? The Rock?
It says The Block. It's by no, Mano Cornelia. It's just
I think that's about
stepping out of your comfort zone there. Yeah.
Yeah. The other ones are anthologies, so that's probably why you don't see those. And I don't know how you find those ones. One is in the UK, and the other one is Ontario. And the other one is called The Food Poets, but you wouldn't see that one yet because that one comes out June 2024. And then the last one is Brothers in the Sky, and it's about the only two Black pilots to be able to fly with the Royal Canadian Air Force back in 1930 or whatever. But that's a children's book to encourage children that they can have a career in aviation and become pilots and whatever. So that one's also coming out next year in March 2024.
Wow,
There's the rundown.
That is such a diverse range of topics that you address, and they sound like hard topics that are also kind of hard pressing but real, and something that maybe these are geared towards young adults, all of them.
No. 2 of them are children's, 2 of them are YA, and then the other ones are adult.
Okay. Yeah. So the grooming one is adult.
That's teen.
No, teen.
Okay, important for teens. I was just like, we'll ask the question we want to ask in a little bit. Hillary has some questions about that, but that's amazing.
Yeah. No. I mean, I don't know why you think I have questions about that, because I was like, what do you mean? I don't.
No, not in a bad way. I just didn't want to ask the question because I was going to ask you about.
I know what question I want to ask.
Exactly. Okay, we'll get to it in a minute. It's nothing hard, Wanda. Don't worry.
Okay. I could do a hard too. It's all right.
I know you can, but I don't want to.
I didn't know where you were going with that, and you having questions of the book about grooming, and I was like, Clinton, where are we going with mine?
No, I see how that could have been misconstrued.
That's what I thought he meant.
No, yeah, okay.
Did you? I will be more careful. Yeah.
We're very open on this podcast about my personal trauma, but I was not going to go there.
No, I see what I did there. And no, it has nothing to do with that.
How about we start talking about the Grover School Pledge?
Okay, well, that's why I have this open here. Yeah, so since I have this open, so the Grover School Pledge drops today, June 20th, let's say, and it's really like it's a new story by yourself, and it's really interesting. And the main character's name is Arlena, and she goes through quite an interesting journey. And I was wondering if you can tell us more about her story and what happens and what the book's about.
Yeah. So the book is about these 3 main friends. So Arlena has a friend named Tina who's white. And then the new girl that moves in is Nadia, who is from Egypt, and she's Muslim. But there's a lot of things that, like a lot of microaggressions that's going on with Arlena. Her friend Tina goes on kind of like a journey where she's learning how to be an ally, but in the beginning it's kind of clunky. She doesn't see what the problem is. But Arlena knows there's microaggressions from her teacher, from other students, little comments that are made, but she just doesn't know what to do with them, and she doesn't know that she has a voice and that she can make a difference. And then when Nadia comes, she's immediately drawn to her in some kind of way, because Nadia's lived in a couple of countries in Africa. It's the first time she's met anybody who's actually lived in Africa. And so they immediately form a bond. So Nadia's writing something on the chalkboard, and the teacher makes a comment about her headscarf. She gets really upset. She slams the chalk down, and she says, this is not acceptable. But she knows the language. Like, she knows there's words for it. So when they get out at lunchtime, they're talking, and Nadia says, "This is how this teacher treats you. This is not good enough." And they decide that they need to do something about it. They just don't know what. So then one day Arlena walks in the house, and her parents and her brother are watching something on TV. There's dead silence. And she says, "What's going on?" And her father says, "Just be silent. We're watching this." And she looks, and she sees people protesting, saying that they want better treatment for whatever happened to the guy that's on TV. And after it's over, they ask their parents questions about it. And the brother says, "Well, if the police try to do something to me, I'm just going to knock them out." And the father and the mother start to have this conversation about, this is how you need to respond because you're a young Black man. And then he tells them the story about when he was a teenager, his father took him to Washington, D.C., and took him to the Million Man March. And he told them about seeing the sea of just a whole bunch of Black men and how empowering that was. And the message was that we take care of each other, we take care of our families, like just the positive message. And then when he says something at the end, he says, "My father taught me that your promise is your pledge." And she took that line, Arlena did, and she took it back to her friends and said, "We need to make the teachers do a pledge, and they need to pledge that they're going to treat us equally. They're going to treat us." And so that's pretty much where the story kind of kicks off, and they spend the bulk of the time talking about how can we make this pledge and getting other friends together of color. And in the end, the principal ends up being an ally. He gives them the space to talk about it in the auditorium, and they read the pledge. And then every teacher in the school signs this pledge to say that they will be allies to their students. That's in not so much of a short explanation.
No, that's amazing. I wish that there would have been that type of book when I was growing up.
Me too.
I also wish my teachers would have taken that kind of a pledge. But that's why we're all doing the work we do now in all of our own rights.
Exactly.
But no, I think I'm curious because when I was reading the bio, obviously it says it's true to life, and I can hear in the description and here in the book that there's certain, like, definitely, protests. We could talk about George Floyd. We could talk about Ahmaud Arbery. We could talk about name a Black person that's been murdered in the last, 5 years, and I can name a protest that went along with it.
Exactly.
I'm curious if there was anything specific that you were pulling from, or is it more of a universal Black BIPOC experience, or if there was one specific instance that you're pulling from in terms of the protests, the Million Man March, all of these aspects?
No, I think it was it's the global experience of what we go through, and then not having a place at that age to put it, like not having a name to say, like, this is a microaggression, you can't do this, or just not feeling like you have a voice. So not necessarily like trying to give a voice to them because they already do have a voice, but just letting them know they do have one. So yeah, nothing in particular, but I felt the Million Man March was important because we always see, every time we're talking about the Black family, it's always seems to be so negative. And I wanted there to be some positivity of, look what they were trying to do with this Million Man March, but weaving it in a way that young people are coming to know about the Million Man March and why it happened, but not necessarily preaching anything to them. Just they're learning it through this, as Arlena learns it, like through this character. And also when you talk about true to life, it was like, it's stuff I wish I had known when I was young. I wish I had the language for the things that people were saying to me and doing to me and stuff. And so Arlena doesn't have the language in the beginning either. And then over the course of the book, she learns that she does have a voice and she can use it. And so that's what I want, the young people to get out of it. So yeah, the second thing that you said, that like the whole global collective experience that we go through as people of color is I guess kind of what I was going for.
Amazing.
That's really interesting and true to life in another way, because we actually in the past couple of months interviewed a young woman from here in Moncton, New Brunswick, who is probably 14 or 15. I believe it was season 2, episode 9, a young woman named Akila Ray, who herself dealt with the same things. She went through school around, her friends in Moncton, feeling awkward comments, and I don't like to use the word microaggressions. I think it's just another word for racism.
Yeah.
But feeling that and never really feel, oh yeah, that's a repeated chant for me. Like you look up the word microaggression.
They find a new word. Yeah, I know.
If you look up the definition, it literally just means people making racist comments against minorities.
Yeah.
So, yeah, she found her voice. She, rallied. She went to her principals and school teachers and tried to get a better curriculum in the schools. And she did have Black Lives Matter New Brunswick come and talk at their school. So stuff like that. So
yeah, that's awesome.
Good for the times is what the book. So as she grows, she goes through the book. She has her friend Nadia, who does have a frame of reference and language because of different countries she's lived in, especially maybe even Egypt, where people are more outspoken and children are exposed to less of a bubble, less of a North American bubble is what I'm saying. Yeah. So they see more, and so she grows through that. But how does she navigate these challenges? I mean, is it a painful experience? I know in the end it's positive.
Yeah, in the end it's positive, but the journey wasn't good because she didn't even tell her parents in the beginning that she was experiencing these things. She didn't know how to bring the conversation. And when her and her friends were planning it, she didn't let her parents in on the planning either. She thought they would probably try to stop her from doing it. In the end, when she does do it and they find out about it, they say, like, we are here for you. We would have been in that 100%. And so she has new learning from that. But in terms of navigating it, they had to figure out who their ally was. And Nadia took a chance and said, okay, so our teacher, Mr. Matthews, is not our ally. He has no, and so he's the one who's causing some of the harm. And she felt like the principal was someone who just really didn't know that things were happening, which isn't good for the principal because you should know that these things are happening. But she said, I want us to have a meeting. And that's what they did. And she let the Black kids came in and they talked to him about what they were going through. And he felt kind of embarrassed because he realized that he wasn't paying attention to that stuff until they brought it to his attention. And so that's why he wanted to do what he can to help. So he ended up being kind of like the ally, but I also didn't want the adult, be the person to give them the solution. I wanted them to come up with their own solution. So he was kind of a helper off to the side. And then when they wrote the pledge, he kind of like helped them perfect it a little bit, but it was still their language. It was still what they wanted to say.
To highlight so what Clinton was hinting to had nothing to do with grooming.
The suspense.
No, so when we were, having our back and forth about the book and the questions we wanted to ask and what we had read in the book, first of all, one of the first things that struck me was the micro, I know we don't use that, but like the aggression. The Oreo comment is something that has happened to me that I have talked about on this podcast upteenth amount of times. Mm-hmm. I think I've blogged about it. I think I've told the CBC about it. Like, it is something that, because I accepted it and I sort of went along with it, I always had a hard time seeing it as a racial slight. Yeah. Because I was like, I was using it as like a joke to make everyone like me. And so seeing it in a book shook me to my core. But thank you, because I felt seen in this children's book. I was like, yes, this is me. But to that point, I had so many questions around the language in the book that's being used, and like in terms of what you're saying. So first of all, the figuring out the language as the characters do, but also figuring out, and like the reason I had the conversation with Clinton is a parent. I am only almost 30. I have no children. And so for me, thinking back to when I was being called an Oreo, when I was in the 7th grade it's 7 years old being called a chocolate bar, I didn't know the words microaggression. I wouldn't have seen protests or walkouts back in the early 2000s. And so I found it so interesting trying to figure out, like, for you as an author and as a parent, and maybe that's why it's easier for you, but for me, it was so hard to imagine having kids who understand the situations in the book. And so I'm curious about your process around how do you speak to kids about something so serious, and then how do you write about kids who understand something so serious? Yeah,
that's a great question. I mean, first of all, being called an Oreo cookie. So when I was younger and we left where we lived at and we moved into the city, all of a sudden I went from a Black community to where I'm the only Black kid in my class. And one of the people who befriended me was a white girl, and people made fun of me for having her as a friend, and people made fun of her for having me as a friend. And we would get those comments like Oreo cookie, like she was the frosting, I was the outside. And it was very hurtful. And I didn't know how to, respond to any of that stuff. So some of it comes from, I know what that feels like. And then even in the book, Tina doesn't even really get it. That's why that's offensive and stuff. But then also there's a lot of, I wouldn't say heavy, but there's a lot of issues in the book, but I try to make them seen through the eyes of Arlena, so that in a younger person's view, here's how she would see that thing. And I try to do that as much as I can, because I could have went on a tangent with some of those issues, and I didn't. Like the thing with Mr. Matthews when he makes a comment about her headscarf, and she says, "You're trying to make me look different." Like he's trying to make me the other, that kind of thing. I could have went all through a whole scene with just that, and I didn't, because it was like, okay, this is as much as they can handle in terms of like not going too deep into the weeds with the whole like discrimination and all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to be, and that's why there's the whole B story of her taking care of this rabbit. And in the end, the rabbit has all these bunnies and all the friends come over. Because I also wanted it to be fun, and I wanted it to be light too. I didn't want it to be just all about the discrimination. I wanted there to be, that silver lining was they're waiting for these bunnies, her rabbit to have all these bunnies. And that was kind of the piece that would, you have a minute to breathe from all the microaggressions, the word that Clinton doesn't like, and then you had some time to see like stuff that was just fun that a kid enjoys.
Yeah, I think just briefly, Clinton, and then I'll let you talk to the point about the Oreo. I think what was funny for me as a kid is that because it wasn't a slur and it wasn't seen as negative, it was just supposed to be fine. And so like I remember in the 3rd grade when I was called a chocolate bar, my teacher tried to explain to me, well, no, like a chocolate bar is sweet. He's calling you sweet. And I was like, I don't know how you don't understand that it's about being brown. I don't see this kid Andrew licking my arm to figure out like my glucose content over here. Like that's not what this is about. And so I just found that very, very interesting though.
Yeah, I think some kids will have either your experience or my experience. Like for you, people just hear it and they think like it's a joke. And then other kids who've had my experience, they'll hear it and they say, yeah, people have called me that. Like, so
Yeah.
I think that's why the term, and I kind of left it where he just called him it and then he just took off running, instead of like staying there and letting him say other things, because people take that term differently.
Right.
Depending on your experience.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That segues a bit into my next question. So it's interesting how you in your own life went from being in an all-black town to Dartmouth, which was just like most of
Pretty
Canada,
white.
primarily white. Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
white. Hillary and I are both like interculturally mixed people, interracial. And, I grew up in Toronto, in a very diverse part of the city, but still mostly white. And Hillary grew up in Moncton, mostly white. And how does that, like, the story is true to life, right? So what do you feel comfortable speaking about? Like, as a writer of both fiction and nonfiction, how did your previous experiences, like as just a person in that region, or plus a journalist, filmmaker, college instructor, how did that inform your process for that book? And like, do you feel comfortable talking about some of the personal experiences you've had, even if maybe a little bit painful, that made this extra important and meaningful to you, to people interested? Of course, so we're probably mostly talking to parents who we are hoping will purchase this book for their children, right?
Yeah.
So
So in my nonfiction books, my brother said to me, like, you're just way too honest. Like, keep writing fiction. Because, like, in the nonfiction books, I'm talking about history that, sometimes people don't want to hear it, but I kind of put it in your face in that way. But in the fiction books, and in particular in this book, I wanted it to be a way for, I actually have a guide that goes with the book. And it's a way for, teachers, parents to like ask some questions and have a discussion with their kids. And I kind of put some answers saying, like, these are not the only answers. These are just, some things that show up in the book. Why do you think that character did this? Why did they do that? So you can have the conversation around the characters. So it doesn't kind of like single out a kid or single out someone's experience, but they can talk about it through the experiences that the characters had in the book. So, and so that's why I wrote the guide, because I know some people just don't know how to have those conversations with children. I don't know if that answered your question.
It answered the first part of it, but I guess I was also asking, like, some people we interview on the show who grew up in the Maritimes have had no bad experiences, no experiences of racism. Everyone even if they were adopted and grew up in an all-white town, everyone was fully supportive. And then we've heard, unfortunately, more often than the opposite, just stories of horrific, traumatizing, life-lingering, horrible memories that happened in the Maritimes that you'd think maybe would happen in like the 50s. But, I feel like the greater population, people maybe even in bigger cities, just think doesn't exist anymore. So the second part of my question was, like, have you had many horrible experiences that you feel comfortable talking about?
Yeah. How much time do you have? I'm just joking.
Can I add
fair.
I'm also just curious, like, is any of this, like, as a parent, I'm wondering, like, what have your kids experienced, if you're willing to share anything like that, or is part of the book, writing towards, what you hope for your kids to be experiencing in schools as well? Because I think that, at least for me, when we were building the Black Histories curriculum, I was working on something I wanted to be a legacy for kids should I move back to New Brunswick and raise them there. And I think that has to be a mindset for all of us who leave legacy in the form of children and work.
No, I definitely think if we have a platform that we should use it for that, because it's always the work you do now is not for you, but it's for the people who come after you. So I really believe that I like to believe that the work that we do and the work you guys do and all that, like getting stories out there, it's for the people who come after, because it will always be there. In terms of personal experience, like when I moved from that community and moved into, so I told you about Nancy Sparks, my grade 3 teacher. Then when I was leaving grade 3 and we went in grade 4. That's when we moved into that community, into Dartmouth. And I mean, people used to, like, kids used to say, was that a gong?
For anyone only listening but not watching, Clinton's whole camera just fell in front of him, and then it chimed.
Oh, did it chime?
Like when it hit your desk, it went boom.
I couldn't hear that. Okay, no.
That's funny.
I
had the gong show. My answer was wrong, and I got gonged.
No. Can you start over and give a better? Sorry.
So when we moved in grade 4, we moved into the city. That's when I started really experiencing like really what racism felt like. And what kids used to say to me, like, go back to Africa. And I didn't know, like, I'd never been to Africa before. I didn't know what that meant, but I just knew it's just the feeling of you're not wanted. And yeah, and getting that every day when you show up at school. Why are you here? No one wants you here. Go back to Africa. And not being able to know how to like deal with that. And that was really hurtful. Like sometimes even, it's all these years later. And it was like sometimes it's like someone's still saying that to me now. And like my kids are grown now. But I did purposely place them in schools that were diverse. Like so when I was working in film and television and I worked on a couple of films, one of the films was what Across the Line that Floyd Kane did. And he and I also grew up in the same community. We were friends. We went off through school together. And the story was centered around something that he and I both experienced in high school in Dartmouth. It was a race riot. And it was the biggest race riot in Nova Scotia history, well, outside of the burning in Shelburne, but of young people. And it was Blacks against whites, and the Blacks who were all from the Black communities and the white people were like from Eastern Passage and Cole Harbor, like massive police, massive like arrests, like a huge thing. And that's what his film was on. And that film went on to be very successful. But Nova Scotia was called Mississippi of the North. Like that's how, and we were like 2%. Blacks were like 2% of the population at that time. That was in the 70s, 80s. And we were coming up at a time when even the teachers weren't on our side sometimes. So, and that experience was very, very scary to know that like people got really, really hurt. A lot of people got injured. Yeah, it was horrible. And when the film came out, which I think was in maybe 2015, I think, or something, not really a lot had changed since when we were in high school till the time he made this film decades later. Not much had really changed, and schools had in some instances been even more divided, like in those areas. So that was, those were just, bad experience. I could probably talk all day about like bad experiences I had in terms of that. But even, I'll give you an example, even in the industry. And I was working for, I don't know if I can say the name because then I'll be calling them racist, but they were racist. Anyway, it was a show that I was working on. It wasn't the CBC
We
show.
don't care. I mean,
okay.
if you're worried about your own liabilities, we are pretty, we take risks. We're pretty uncensored. And feel free to go on, but we're never very worried about that.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So it's okay, but for your own sake, yeah.
Okay.
Protect yourself.
But I mean, it was a lifestyle show that was like, from the U.S. Like, how they have like what's it called? Those music talent
Reality?
shows. Like, yeah, it was like American Idol America, and then you had American Idol Canada, and like whatever. It was one of those kind of things, but Canada's version.
So you think you got talent or something?
Yeah, like that. And I was working on the show, and then I kind of got promoted. Like I was in charge of the Halifax leg of the show, and the executive director was coming down from Toronto to meet with this Wanda Taylor. And she'd only spoken to me on the phone. And when we get there, the 3 people that were working under me, you see where this is going, right?
We know exactly the 3 words she's going to say.
Yeah, the people that were working under me it was an older lady, and then there was a young girl, and then there was a man, and the 4 of us are sitting in the room. And she walks directly over to the younger girl and shakes her hand and says, "Are you Wanda Taylor?" And she said, "No." And then she looked at the older lady, and the lady said, "I'm not Wanda." And then she looks at me like, "This can't be Wanda. Like, why are you?" And it was almost like, "Why are you Black and in charge of something? And then why did you not sound Black on the phone?" Like that, her face said that. Like that was
you're
exactly.
Black.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you're Black. Like she couldn't. Yeah. There's no poker face there. So immediately it was like, and this is what you deal with, like in the industry, like those kind of racist stereotypes about who gets to be in charge of stuff and who doesn't, and so I mean, it's just you live it almost every day in some kind of way. You live it. Sometimes you feel it and you can't put your finger on it, but you know that's what it is.
Yeah, and I don't expect you to go into every experience you've had because again that would be the whole season. Yeah. But my main point was just to connect the idea. We all know this, but that you're not just pulling these fictional ideas out of the air. These things happen to you. They've happened to me. They've happened to Hillary. And in a nutshell, to us, or to me, that's what non-violent, non-systemic racism is. It's, you mentioned this earlier, but it's the strong feeling caused by others that you're not simply a human to them, and
Yeah.
that the people around you don't feel like you belong. And non-violent, non-systemic racism, it's just this combination of multiple experiences throughout a lifetime that create this big PTSD response.
You
This
said
one
that so
huge
well.
trauma.
Yeah, so well. You're so right.
We talk, thank you. We talk about it a lot.
You perfected the language around it, it sounds like.
Thought about it a lot, yeah. But that's what we hear you say, and that's what we've had the honor of interviewing so many people, and it's the unifying message that we get.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that, and just making it all more real for our listeners.
I think to that point, I'm curious, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, but in writing this, was there anything that was particularly challenging, not only in terms of like I was asking before about the voices and the perspectives, but also like, I don't know if it brought up anything, or if there was anything that you were just like hitting a wall. And I always find this fascinating just from a writer's perspective of like, what made it hard?
Yeah. No,
But if
that's
there's
a good question.
anything like that, or anything that was specifically, impactful, that was so meaningful to also have in the book as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the relationship between Arlene and her mother, I tried to make that feel as authentic as possible, because we have these stereotypes about Black mothers, and I wanted her to feel loving but funny, and then sometimes not taking any sauce, but at the same time like very loving, and I want them to have a good relationship. And also, when it came to, I was writing like nobody's business, and then once you get an editor, now you have another set of eyes on your work, and so then sometimes it's a conversation about, does this part work? And then I have to justify, well, I need that there because of this. Or sometimes they see things that I missed, and they'll say, well, why don't we, do this with the character? And then I'll be like, yeah, I never thought of that. That would be good. Like, so having those conversations, I think, helped me get past the stuck parts, like parts where I was like, am I going too far with that incident of discrimination? Should I back that up a bit? Is this too much for them? And I always wanted to make sure I wasn't sounding preachy. So like having another eye on that kind of stuff was really helpful in terms of the editing. But then, it gets to the point where there's certain things that they'd send it out to people like other eyes, editors or whatever, sensitivity readers or whatever, and they'll come back with some little notes. And one note that I got was there was a line in there where her mother says, she's calling her, she's not listening because she's preoccupied with what she's trying to do with the pledge. And her mother makes this comment and says, child, are you deaf? And that's kind of like a Black grandmother thing. Like they'll say that to you, but then they flagged it as, well, we might offend, people from the hard of hearing community, and, and having a conversation around that. And it wasn't a way to discriminate against deaf people. It was more like showing that cultural, like, mother thing. But then I was like, yeah, it's pick your battles. And then I just changed the wording of it, because it's not that I want, if I'm trying to like talk about young people being discriminated against, I didn't want to also just make the readers feel like something was discriminatory to them. So like there's all those little conversations about every little sentence or every little situation, making sure it sounds right and feels right.
I have another quick question. Sorry, and I don't know if you're allowed to answer my second one, but out of curiosity, my question one was just in terms of all the other work that you've done. Were they all in partnership with like authors, editors, or any of them self-published? And to that point, in terms of the conversation about your editors, do you try to have a team that's primarily of color or marginalized when dealing with something marginalized? Or is it like you get what the big book brand gives you, and then you're like trying to explain to a white person why this language is important? Because I can't imagine that would be so frustrating and add a whole other element. But if you get what you get and you want the book deal and all that stuff, I can imagine having, maybe to make some of those editorial sacrifices. But I'm just being nosy.
Oh my God. No, I'll spill all the tea. There's so much in there that you said. Like, so first of all, you asked me about other. So during the pandemic, me and my two of my grandchildren are 11 and 12, and we wrote a book together, which was called "We Are Not the Zoo." Oh, that was one of the books I forgot to mention. But and we self-published that because I wanted it to be immediate for them because, when you write a book, it's like 2 or 3 years before it ever sees the light of day. So I self-published it so they can see it immediately for themselves. And then their school had something, and I did a virtual thing for it. So that wasn't with the publisher. So that was really that was us, like what we wanted to do with that book. Your second question was about editors.
Like your editor and your team, like how often can you advocate for them being racialized? Are they racialized, or is it you trying to tell a bunch of white people why this language is important?
Yes. So I asked so the original editor I had for this, who actually discovered the book, was a white person, but then she was leaving. I asked about the diversity within HarperCollins. So the editor that I had was a person of color that I worked with for the entirety of the book and the next book that's coming. And I said to them, my illustrator has to be a person of color. Like, that wasn't negotiable. And they were like, they're like, yeah, no problem. And then we had a couple of people of color give their illustrations so we could see which one kind of fit for the book. But for me, it was like, that's not anytime I have a book that needs illustrations, it's always going to be about Black illustrator.
Right.
Anytime I could, the cover, there's always going to be something about Blackness on the cover. Like, so there's some things for me, and I've never had any pushback from that. Like, I've never had, like, even in the teen books, both of the girls on the front are people of color. Although in one of the books, I didn't like the picture they put on there. But anyway, and it was early on, so I didn't know I could speak up and say, no, I don't like it, change it. But now I do that.
Wanda found her voice.
Her voice, yes.
Through that journey. Yes. The story of Wanda finding her voice in book publishing. Beautiful.
That becomes the title of an autobiography in 5 years, and Clinton and I are sitting there like, now didn't we suggest it?
Yeah.
No, that's amazing.
You get a deal on it.
Pull up the archives. Did I mention that?
No, that's amazing though. And it is HarperCollins, and I didn't want to name drop them just in case
they
we were about to be like, well, they were all white, but figured.
No, they were great in terms of that. Like, my experience with that was wonderful.
Okay. Go ahead, Clinton.
No, I was just going to say, and that, I guess, is part of being part of a bigger team. You go through lens, and you have your editors and other people involved, but that also helps you get your outreach to a much larger audience with probably a lot less work than the self-published books.
Exactly.
And I guess I know people who've gone through similar struggles, and I guess in the end, these book companies have liabilities to worry about as well.
It's a business.
It's a business. A name still hold.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not always. I mean, I know a lot of people whose experiences weren't the same, and it's all about the right fit, like when they match you and fitting with the right editor, having the right conversations with them, and then being open to you as a creator, and all down the line. So I know people, and I used to be an acquisitions editor for a book publishing company, and I brought in a lot of emerging writers. But what I found was that I was always sitting around the table with everyone else, trying to convince them why this was a good book, what that story meant, why the author was telling it that way. Sometimes that worked, and sometimes I just couldn't get people to understand why that story needed to be told, which is frustrating, to say the least, especially when you're the only one of color there trying to champion these BIPOC stories, and everyone else in the room is looking at you like, we don't get it.
You really have had an amazing, diverse story within, I would say, the industry of the arts or media publication. You've really worn many hats and sat in a lot of roles. It's a really interesting story you have. My last question, and then if Hillary has some more, or there's anything you want to add, Wanda, is what do you hope readers will take away from the Grover School Pledge? What messages or ideas do you really want to ingrain in any young reader that picks up this book?
That's a good question. I really hope not just young readers read it, but I really hope parents read it too. And I hope teachers talk about it in their classrooms, because I think it's not just a pledge for those young people. I think it's a pledge for all of us, to pledge to be allies, to pledge to be better. But I hope kids take away from the book that their difference is their beauty, like, to be celebrated, and that diversity should be celebrated. And that it doesn't matter who your friends are, because one of the friends is white who ends up learning to be an ally. But I wanted all kids, not just BIPOC kids, but I wanted all kids, maybe if they're on the other end, to know that what I'm doing is harmful to that person, and then maybe not do it anymore. Or like to the person who's on the receiving end, to know that you do have your voice and you can use it. So there's different messages that I wanted to send for different readers, but I hope they all walk away with something of hope, feeling hope.
That's amazing. And I will add, I love when books have those like workbook sections at the end for like potential classroom instruction, teachers or activities kids can reflect on and answer either on their own or in a classroom setting.
Yeah. And it's not, it should
great.
be inside the book. It's not, but it's a separate attachment. But, you know, that was my not pushing for it to be attached to the book, but it's there.
Okay.
I guess my last question, just as we wrap up, is you've teased as well that something's coming out in 2024, and I didn't know how much you could spill or if you wanted to elaborate on that. So while people are today at this very moment going out and buying the Grover School Pledge, they have something to look forward to. If you can tell us a little bit about what's coming out in the future.
Do you mean the nonfiction children's or the fiction children's? Because they're both coming out next year.
Tell us about both. Why would we stop you?
Oh, okay.
That's not everything.
So the nonfiction children's book is coming out with Nimbus Publishing, and that's Brothers in the Sky, and that's about two Black men who were able to fly as pilots back in the 1930s and 40s, when Black people weren't even allowed to get inside the front of an airplane and do that. So it's celebrating them, but also it's giving Black kids a role model to say, instead of just thinking of flying in the sky as a dream, it's something that you can actually do because these two Black men did that. So, and then also in the book, they'll be looking at some other people who have achieved in aviation, so women and stuff like that. So that one's coming out in March in partnership with the Royal Canadian Air Force's 100th anniversary. And the other one that's coming out, that's the second book in the 2-book deal with HarperCollins. And that's, right now, the title is called The Food Poets. I don't know if that's going to still be the title, but it's about a group of kids who love food, they love poetry, and they find a way to mix the two together. Cultural foods and their writing, their love of poetry. And kids get introduced to foods from different cultures through the book.
That sounds so cool.
That sounds
that
unique.
just sounds like something I would want to do. I'm like, can I write like a haiku and then also?
What, do you know any recipes? I'm looking. But you know, some of them I had to kind of like gear down to a kid's level of like no complicated ingredients that they've never seen or heard before. But
I don't know.
You have to taste yummy and thinks and looks like it's yummy, and I have to write it like it's yummy. So that's kind of a challenge.
I don't know if Senegalese mafe translates well. Like, how do you explain a magie cube to a child? But also, it's like a soy sauce in a square. Like that's how I'm gonna describe it.
Yeah. If you could make it yummy, they'll like it.
It's peanut butter sauce. What kid, unless the ones who are allergic?
Yeah,
that's a selling point. I mean, peanut butter. Kids love peanut butter. I'll email you the recipe.
Okay, sounds good. Good. I can make it work.
Perfect.
We'll see if it shows up in the book. We'll see if you just being polite or it makes the cut.
Guarantee sell now because I'm gonna have to.
Listen, if I can make it yummy, it'll be in the book.
Perfect.
Amazing. So this is Wanda Taylor, the author of the book that's being released today, Tuesday, June 20th, the Grover School Pledge. And I think we're doing a giveaway. I think they'll be posted on the page, we'll do either collabo with Wanda or HarperCollins themselves, whatever works better. And Hillary is usually better at explaining the social media contest. I'm putting you on the spot, but I will say, like I always say, thank you to all of our listeners who listen to the end, especially all of our audio listeners on our streaming platforms. It's not working for me. Our audio listeners who don't get to see the fun. I gotta fix this stand.
What I want to say, we're a grassroots organization.
Is any new followers that we get between like now and when the book's giving away, we will count that as a contest entry.
Don't say that. How am I supposed to calculate that? Stop.
Analytics. No, I'll take care of that part. I'm taking responsibility. Comment on the stream. Follow us on YouTube, or just leave a comment on YouTube. Especially, you leave a comment on YouTube. That's 3 entries. And then on social media, basically, we'll have like a tag and reshare contest. And we're going to be giving away 1 copy of the book, the Grover School Pledge, to someone in Canada. You do have to be in Canada. Well, we'll have it through HarperCollins, have it shipped to anywhere in Canada.
And I think it will be a signed copy.
Ooh.
We'll make it signed copy. There you go.
Signed copy, yeah.
And now I want to win it. Should I comment on our YouTube? You're going to track that, Clinton?
I will track it. I'll
right, there you
track
go.
it.
Perfect.
And the rest of the contest details will be on our social media.
Yes.
But Wanda, do you want to plug anything specifically? Obviously, it'll be available HarperCollins.ca and Amazon. Do you want to plug your socials or places you think people could follow you, newsletter people could sign up to keep up to date with everything you're doing? Feel free to take it away.
Yeah, I'm kind of horrible on social media, but I am there and I do post sometimes. But at Wanda Writing is my Twitter handle. My IG is WATAY 2019. And my website is www.wandataylor.squarespace.com. And there you can also go on and see my books. You can see what other stuff I've done that isn't books, like film or whatever. And you can also email me there as well.
Amazing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for writing this type of book and writing the books that you've written before, which I will now go back and read and could cultivate. And also will recommend to our connections at the New Brunswick School District, because I think that these are super important, or if they can find something similar about New Brunswick, but I doubt. But I do think that these are important resources for kids there who need the same representation and to feel seen and heard.
Yeah.
In the language, because like I said, I was like, I wouldn't know, but
yeah,
I have no humans yet. Later.
Absolutely. Thank you again for tuning in. Thank you, Wanda. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe, follow, make sure you leave a comment. We'll play the outro intro, and then Wanda will ask you to stick around for a few moments. So
this was fun. Thank you.
Thank you.